names are Ben,
Rayleigh,
Leslie.
and today we're going to take the time to discuss about the book, The Girl with Seven Names. Some of the things we'll cover is a summary over the book, conflicts in the book, themes and symbols we saw. We'll give it a story review. We'll take some time to interview some people. There'll be an advertisement near the end, and then we'll wrap up and give a summary of everything we discussed, and then we'll close it and we'll get out of your guys' way.
Just to give an idea of what the book is about, here's a short summary about The Girl with Seven Names. North Korea is seen as a very scary place and, of course, seen as impossible to escape. But we know of one who told their story and how they escaped. Han Seung Lee. She was born into a family who had a very good background, and they went pretty far back with that. With this, she went through a lot of ups and downs throughout her life from a very young age, seeing she didn't belong to anyone besides North Korea, and then as she got older, you can see her grow more independent.
For our first fun fact, according to the lowdown, the Kim family has run under a totalitarian rule for 3 generations
Our
now.
story kind of opens up with our protagonist, Hyanseo, and then our antagonist is not an actual person because our conflict is mostly a character versus a society, and our antagonist, I guess you could say, is North Korean oppression itself. The type of conflict, like I said, is character versus society, but you can see some character versus self in it, some internal conflict, but it's mostly an, I guess, external conflict because of the oppression. I guess you could say that's an internal conflict, but it's mostly external. And then the internal conflict we can see when Hyanseo struggles within herself when she figures out that her dad that she's living with right now isn't her real dad, and that's because her grandma tells her, and it's a big inside factor for her. And another example of, I guess, a character versus self is you see it with multiple side characters too. You see it with Minho when he struggles to leave his girlfriend behind in North Korea. It's a moral check for everybody. After Hyanseo hangs up the phone on his girlfriend, she breaks down in tears because it just hurts her inside that there's very little they could do at that time to help her escape North Korea. And then the obvious example of character versus a society is just oppression. I've given multiple examples of oppression we see throughout the book, but I guess one could be when Hyanseo sees the hangings for prosecution for people who broke the law in some way. Then the Bobu police, there's multiple others. One big example of oppression is on page 67. Hyanseo is discussing an event where, one second. While we were waiting for news, 5 uniformed military officials hammered on our door one evening, entered without removing their boots, and ransacked our home in search of cash and valuables my father had allegedly hidden. They ripped open the walls, tore up the floor, and pulled down the ceiling. They left empty-handed after an hour of destruction. My mother and I were in shock as we stared about at the damage. Our house was completely wrecked. About 2 weeks after my father had disappeared, my mother was told that he suddenly had been released in a hospital in Hyeonseon. And it's just an example, it's also an example of the privacy theme that Rayleigh mentioned. Their home was just ransacked on page 67, and they're looking for valuables, and they didn't find them, but still, it's just, come on now, their house is ransacked by military officials, and I don't know about you, I wouldn't want just random military officials coming into my place and destroying my home without me telling them they can, even though I would never tell them they could. One major theme I feel we can all see throughout the book, The Girl with Seven Names, is oppression or the lack of liberty. And, some examples throughout the book, there's several, but just a few. On page 17, the bottom of it, Hyancio mentions about once a month, officials wearing white gloves entered every house in the block to inspect portraits of Kim Jong-il, and if they were found dirty, then the family would be punished. Another would be on page 19. Her mother was once found wearing trousers instead of a skirt, and trousers were not allowed in public. They're prohibited for a Korean woman specifically. She had to bribe the people off to not turn her in, and she paid a fine, and later they released her, or they didn't release her because she was never taken, but they let her go for paying the fine. And then my final example is on page 28. Hyancio sees hangings. North Korea does public hangings to put fear in their people. The hanging was actually, she saw one of her mom's friends, and the woman was accused of seducing a state bank official in order to steal money. And they just do these trials to put fear into people, and that's still kind of how North Korea is. They run their country with an iron fist in order to keep their people under control. And that's just straight up oppression. It's dictatorship, tyranny. There's not much that people can do because they're closed off from the outside world, and it sucks for them because they're born there and there's very little they could do about it. And I guess if they really want to do something about it, like Hyancio, they'd have to escape North Korea, which itself is very hard because the borders are closed. And even if you make it to China, often if you escape to China, often what happened to Hyancio, she was questioned for being a North Korea refugee and almost was sent back, but she passed the test she was put through. The book itself kind of builds around oppression, actually, obviously, but there wouldn't be much of a story without it. And the purpose of the book is just to give people on the outside of North Korea what it's actually like in there, and what it's actually like, because a lot of people obviously do go through oppression, but not a lot of people go on through it with the level of Hyancio and her family did. It really gives people that inside look of what North Korea is actually like, and what's sad is it's still like that to this day. And hopefully we'll see some sort of progression throughout North Korea, but dictatorships are just not ideal for people's freedom, because you're having somebody tell you what's best for you rather than actually getting a say than what you think's best for you. You have someone else decide that for you, and that's just what the people of North Korea go through, and there's other people that go through that too. And the main purpose of the book I feel, is to definitely help people understand what others go through, and hopefully somehow set the country on a path to get out of their old ways.
Okay, so a central theme, I think, is animosity. And, there's many examples of it. One is the Songbird system. It's an entire system built around a person's family history. They can use it to kind of better or benefit themselves in society. Either getting a better job, being more trustworthy with their bosses, maybe even getting a raise from them. And then another is marriages too is a very big one. If a family kind of wants to keep an actual good relationship in society, because if you're outed as an untrustworthy person, you could be put to death for that. And I think that's a really big reason why And then another example, I guess, would be kind of like the organizations they put on, like the Boibo and the Beijing. So the first one is kind of like a social police that they've kind of like implemented, and it's basically to keep check of like actual citizens. And the Beijing is like the person that's head of their own like neighborhood watch, and those are the ones that kind of like look around and see who's suspicious around them, and that's like more, I guess, oppressive if you think about it, or creates more animosity because everyone's kind of just there for themselves now. You can't like trust anybody else. And another thing that kind of reinforces that is public executions. I mean, just from that, you can try to like put fear into everyone.
To add on what Pablo said, I think a big reason of why there's so much animosity throughout North Korea is just because of how they were raised and how the government is actually in North Korea. Obviously, it's an oppressive government, but it's kind of, when you grow up in North Korea, I'm assuming that it's kind of everyone out for themselves because of the way the government is. Somebody might turn in another person to get in a higher place or get their family in higher standard, and that's why I feel like there's just such strong animosity throughout North Korea. And like Pablo said, you can see it throughout the entire book, especially with the example I gave for oppression, when Hyeon Seo's mom has to pay a bribe to a group of people for wearing trousers instead of a skirt on that certain day in North Korea. And yeah, that's all I have to add.
As a songbun, there's 3 levels of it, but it's all based on loyalty. And North Korea has a strict one for social classification, but you can't move up or down. Well, you can move down, but you can't move up. It goes back for about 6 generations for people, but again, you can't alter it because it comes with your ancestry. And records are kept up to date and kept track of, and they have 4 like different locations. Like even when you move, they have a record of you. So I think that even if you did try to help like somebody else, it could affect you. Or even if you were out for yourself and you saw something and let's say they found out, then you'll get in trouble too. So yeah.
So a big theme in this book is also privacy, because there's little privacy in North Korea. The neighbors are watching them all the time, and if they turn someone in, they get a reward. So that's like their own system of surveillance. And about once a month, officials wearing white gloves enter every house in the block to inspect them and make sure they're clean and they don't have any stuff. And another invasion of privacy that the North Korean people suffer is the BOB, which is a secret police that monitors them every time.
I agree heavily with Rayleigh's theme. It's a lack of privacy in North Korea, and we see it multiple times throughout the book. You can see it often throughout the book. He gave you multiple examples, and it's just a kind of sucky situation that your neighbor might turn you in just to get a higher position or a reward, or you're constantly being watched. If your neighbor isn't watching you, they have a secret police that's watching you, the Bobu, and then on top of that, they're blatant about it too. They have government officials come in and inspect your house to make sure it's clean, and they expect the painting of Kim Jong-il, and if it's found dirty or your house is found unfit, you could face prosecution, and it's just a terrible situation for everybody in North Korea. Yeah. Our fourth and final